Hey, yo. Um, so I have no real idea what I'm going to talk about. I really wasn't planning on doing a video, mainly because I'm beyond exhausted. Sleep has been rough the last week and a half. A lot of waking up and not pleasant things. So then it's hard to fall back asleep, so forth and so on. And then I've got to wake up at 3:30 in the morning to go to work. But I've been working out the last couple of days, hoping one of these days is going to cause my body enough exhaustion that it's just going to fade. Um, so, being I am exhausted, I was not planning on coming on here, but for something told me make a video. So I'm like, okay, Lord, what do you want me to talk about? So I'm kind of waiting on that. I have no idea. Maybe he just wants me to talk. So some of the things that's going on, which has been kind of interesting. So obviously, certain topics I'm not going to hate, Brother Jack. Obviously, some things I'm not going to be getting into. Although I may briefly touch on it, but not going to get into too much detail about it. Get my damn phone to stay up. Sorry, I just had a military thought pop in my head. Not appropriate joke to be sharing on this channel, so I won't. But so not sure if anybody here watches these videos, which I apologize that I waste however much time I waste in your life. But not sure if you caught how Saudi signed a military deal with Russia. It's very interesting. So it was around the same time that things in Afghanistan were happening, and the world was vastly seeing a reliable ally was not so reliable anymore. Due to work as well as personal, I will leave it at that. I don't feel like losing my job. But, you know, when I read it, you know, I, along with other, you know, watch men and women that I've seen who have talked about it, which really hasn't been that many. I don't know if too many people have really clued into that actually happened. Was Ezekiel 38 became just a little bit more clear. Okay? So, the Ezekiel 38, for anyone who's maybe watching this video for one of my videos, well, God's videos for the first time, a video from this channel, Ezekiel 38 war talks about how Gog and Magog is going to raise up an army. It's going to be a coalition of a bunch of different nations. Some of them include today's Russia, who's actually leading the charge, Turkey, Iran, I think Libya, Ethiopia, a few other countries. And what they're going to do is they're going to rise up an army and attack Israel. Now, what's going to happen is as they come to attack Israel, Israel isn't going to lift a finger, and God is going to supernaturally protect his country and his people. And he's going to defeat every single one of those armies. And if memory serves me right, the resources from the fallout of said failed attack is going to give Israel resources for years to come. Now, after that, Ezekiel, it talks about how after it, other nations will say, why did you do that? Basically, I'm paraphrasing. Why did you do that? For spoils of war? And that's it. There's no, they don't come to Israel's defense. They don't raise up an army, and it just basically asks a question of, why'd you do that? Okay, and do nothing. Well, we're seeing how in recent see how the U.S. would be one of those countries that don't do anything. With Saudi Arabia making a military deal with Russia, and in turn, Saudi, has a lot of influence of the nations that surround it. Those other nations are going to follow suit. So whatever Saudi does, they're going to do. Now, whether they sign a military deal or not, I don't know, but however Saudi's going to react at said time, that's what they're going to do. Well, if Saudi just signed a military deal with Russia, the country that's going to be leading the Gog and Magog war, they might oppose it and ask, but they have a military deal, so they aren't going to do anything. It's making a little bit more sense now of, well, how is this happening? How is that all going to happen? We're watching it unfold and start being set before our eyes. On top of that, if you see Russia is getting more involved in the Middle East, especially in Syria, and I believe they are probably setting their sights on Lebanon next, trying to influence that area and gain a foothold in Lebanon. Which at that point then, Israel's pretty much surrounded, and Israel's they've got that deal with other nations right now, but without without the feeling of they better, adhere to it or fear the United States, Israel's kind of by themselves right now. And you can see it. There's nobody really there willing to stand with and defend Israel right now, which again just makes the Ezekiel 38 make a lot more sense. It's also interesting that another one of our closest allies, the UK, their prime minister came out and said that with the current administration, they will not agree to any military cahoots, however you put it, any dealings with the current administration military-wise. That is how far we have fallen in the eyes of the world. But again, if you look at the end-time scriptures, none of the West is really seems to be a part of set end times. And the only country in the West that really had any significant global power was the United States. But unfortunately, I think we've seen that dwindle. So it's making a lot more sense of how the West, it really isn't, factored too much into the end times. When you look at the West at this point, it doesn't have a whole lot of influence. It's all focus is on the Middle East. Countries in the Middle East are what's being focused on. And the two countries that are having impact on that is Russia and China. Right? Gog and the Red Dragon. Or possibly the Red Dragon. So it's very interesting. So all that shows is we are that much closer. And look how much time that all this has happened. It really hasn't taken that, a whole lot of time. It was, maybe a week and a half ago. People are still, we're still, you know, in it maybe 2 weeks ago now, Afghanistan. We were still there, operating like nothing had happened, and then within 1 week, the entire country fell, and we're out. And a lot has happened in that week, especially with the view of our country in the world eye. And of course, other countries are stepping it up. China, I think, recently came out and gave out a warning to the world. That's kind of been interesting, as other countries, as this thing happened in Afghanistan, Russia has stepped up quite a bit. We've been watching, and as other watchmen and women have stated, you know, Russia's really kicked up, especially in Syria. Amir Tsarfati put out a post just a little bit ago that said an Iranian cargo plane was tracked landing in Damascus. That's an interesting development. So they're not even trying to go through, send stuff through Iraq or over through Lebanon or Syria or whatever. No, they're now just flying straight into Damascus. Cargo ship. I wonder what's on that. I wonder if we're going to see a big boom soon. So Russia's been really stepping up. They've actually been doing, I think it was last week, Amir Tsarfati showed a video where Russia was, you know, carrying some airstrikes in Syria themselves. China came out and let the world know, hey, if you want to enter Chinese sea, as well as that disputed sea between them and Taiwan, China's already said, you better let us know first. So at this point, I don't think it's a question of if, it's just a question of when China's going to try taking over Taiwan. And the only thing that's been keeping them from doing it so far is us. Well, Iran has ramped up and been open that they are now enriching uranium more than 60%. They're not even hiding it. That happened around the same time. And it looks like North Korea started up a nuclear reactor. All these countries have all started their shenanigans, picking it up, being open, broadcasting it, all within the last week. And why? Because the thing that was keeping them at bay, they no longer fear. So I'll talk about things picking up and going on roid rage. Yeah, buckle up. Buckle up and keep watching, because things I think are going to pick up very quickly. I know we got some watchmen and women, their next high watch time. I know that Israel celebrates Rosh Hashanah, Feast of Trumpets, 6th through the 8th of September. Some people are saying due to the Enoch calendar, they're actually a week early, so it'll be around the 15th of September is when it really is. I'll do my typical, looking at everything in the world, looking at how things are shaping up. Something's brewing, yeah, something's brewing up. That's the understatement of the century. Like I said, I don't know if we'll actually see Isaiah 17, Damascus being turned into rubble. Because that may be what kicks off, a lot of people, you know, believe that will be what kicks off the Ezekiel 38 war. Israel strike first. I don't know if we'll be around to see that, depending on if that kicks off, and that's kind of our cue saying, hey, it's time to go, or if we'll be raptured out before all that shenanigans start. Either way, either that's next on the docket or the rapture's on the docket. Either way, I think both are going to happen. If not at the same time, in close proximity. So, you know, in time, you know, if we understand the fig tree prophecy correctly, as well as the feasts, God's feasts, and what He said and has shown each of them to represent, you know, the fall feast will be, you know, especially, what is it? It's, okay, there's the Feast of Trumpets, Feast of Atonement, and Feast of Tabernacles, I think. During the Feast of Trumpets, and the last blast of the trumpets that are sounded. Typically it's 99 trumpet blasts, and then 100th at the end, which is longer than the rest. And I'm wondering if that isn't the blast that takes us up. And then the Feast of Atonement and Feast of Tabernacles would be at the end of the tribulation, which they was only done in fall, which the fig tree prophecy details everything that'll happen from when the fig tree blooms all the way up until the second coming, when Jesus Christ sets foot on Mount of Olives. That's after the 7-year tribulation, so forth and so on. Psalms talks about a generation being 70 years up to 80 years of God willing, but with pain, suffering, so forth and so on. We pass a lot of 99% of biblical scholars will say the fig tree and the fig tree prophecy represents the birth of the Israeli nation in May 14th, 1948. We already obviously passed the 70-year mark, so the next up is 80 years. But if you do 1948 plus 80, it takes you to 2028. If you do minus 7 years, it brings you to allow for the tribulation, then it's 2021. And if we're understanding the feast properly, and God is going to complete the fall feasts as He has the other ones, in the fall, this is the last fall that can happen in order for it to happen within the prophecy as God stated, if we are understanding it correctly. Why? Because next fall, 7 years later, would put Israel at 81. But Psalm says a generation is 70 to 80 years. And God promised that a generation that sees all these things come to pass will not pass away. So, if we are understanding everything correctly, it is the last day of August. Tomorrow we hit September. Clock is running down, and it's just like God to wait until the last possible second to allow as many people as possible to turn to Him, to be saved from the hell that is coming on this earth. But time is running out. If we're understanding everything correctly, and based on how we are seeing everything coming to pass, as we're seeing the Middle East things come to pass, as we're seeing weather and other natural disasters, the birth pangs that God said would happen come to pass, everything is lining up. I don't think we are misinterpreting it, and I don't think God would have allowed, because like I said, most biblical scholars would, say that the fig tree prophecy is referring to the birth of Israel in 1948. If we have been teaching this wrong all this time, I think God would have done something to correct it a long time ago. So far, it's never been corrected by God, from my understanding. So, for me, it's any day. It could be before I'm done with this video. Or it could be Feast of Trumpets. It makes perfect sense to me. But for me, I don't set dates. I say that it's high times. I understand it. Agree with it. But I'm not setting a date. Because who knows? But one thing, if we're understanding everything correctly and based on how the world is going, we are definitely running out of time. So, Yeah, and towards the end of the year, it might be early. I'm expecting here soon, more than by the end of the year. I'm expecting within the next few weeks to month, start getting hourly updates of stuff. The birth pangs are just, it's, I'd say it's daily, but it's even a little bit more than daily at this point. I mean, there's just so much going on all over the place all the time that nobody can keep up with it all. Nobody. You can't. There's just too much. So we kind of hit the high topics, focus on the prophecies, and judge it by that way. But after the first blast, we just wonder what that is. As more blasts happen, we realize what it is. We start sharing, we start getting giddy, so forth. 100th blast, then all of a sudden, done. I don't know. Somehow, I know without a doubt, the Holy Spirit, if something like that doesn't happen, at the very least, the Holy Spirit is going to move in every single saved person and let them know it is time.